and welcome to the Glass House Festival, Poetry from Around the World. We are bringing to you over 85 poets in this international online festival. And all of these poets have come together this year for one cause, our creative endeavors to help people who have been affected by COVID in 2020. The Glass House Festival is wholly promoted by the Art Mantram Trust, which is a not-for-profit organization based in Bangalore, India. And the Art Mantram Trust has been promoting the arts, artists, and art awareness since 1999. This panel is called Carved from Glaciers, and it is my absolute honor and privilege to introduce to you our esteemed panelists today. Vladimir Lucien, Raphael Dabdon, Michelle Cahill, and Mahdi Mansoor. And this panel will be moderated by Yumna Hari Singh. Yumna is the curator of the Glass House Festival and is the founder trustee of the Art Mantram Trust. Over to you, Yumna.
Thank you, Somrita. Welcome, Raphael and Vladimir. For our very observant viewers, you may note that it is Raphael, Vladimir, and I alone while we await our missing adventurers, but hopefully they will interpretedly get in here before our session ends. We're going to follow a format where I hand over immediately into the good stuff. So we're going to start with Raphael. Raphael, I just wanted to start by saying, this is a few lines of your poem. For people who are looking for their bios, they're all online. So, Raphael, I'm going to butcher this as much as you state that you do. But in your lines, I am no son of the soil, no daughter of the land, and have no business with Mama Africa. My tongue don't click when I say umbotki, umkomboti. My throat don't sound like a cheese grater when I say Haman Skral. And I think with that, as an introduction into Raphael, I hand over to you. Can you share some work with us?
Thank you, Yumna, for introducing me and for using that poem in particular to introduce me. That poem was about a reflection on my identity and my positionality and my role in the country where I live now and where I've been living for the last 12 years, which is South Africa. But I'm originally from Italy, and so there is that dimension of being, always an outsider, or living in a place in between, or rather, in the middle of different worlds. So yeah, that poem was thank you for reminding me of those lines. Yeah, I think that a lot of my poetry reflect that kind of feeling, of being, part of a country. Because as a poet, I was born here. I didn't write poetry in Italian before I moved to South Africa. I started writing poetry here, and so I consider myself a South African poet, 100%. Because there's no Italian poet that speaks to me, so yeah, so if you want, actually I can read one poem that can break the ice, also in connection with the title of this session. And since you mentioned that, let me start with a poem that speaks about my name. And it was also inspired by the fact that I'm here in South Africa. Here in South Africa, there is a tradition, a millenary tradition, which is commonly known as praise poetry. And one of the ways in which this praise poetry is articulated is by telling the story of the family name, of the clan name. So when I first came here, I saw these young poets reciting these long poems, telling the story about their family and their ancestry. And I realized I had nothing of that. I didn't know the history of my family. I mean, I felt uprooted. So what I did some research on the origin of my name and surname, and I wrote this one, my name. 1, Raphael. Its root is featured in one of God's names, like Badu in You Got Me, meaning God has healed the divine healer, guides the younger, comforts the elder, protects the traveler, the blind, the physician. One of the four angels who stand round the throne of God, the angel of a pool called Bethesda, where the sick go to be healed. He always goes to those who know they are too weak to make it on their own. He is filled with all good things through him. Prayer is good for him, with fasting and alms. 2. Abdon. The root means yours truly. In the Bible, it appears 4 times as the name of a man and once as that of a city. The masculine noun means both worker and subject. The feminine noun means labor, service, religious discipline, and a collective performance of queens. The verb means to work or to serve, rich in sense, ubiquitous in use. It has the power to take gist from whatever comes next. If the story tells of dressing vines, it reads working vines. If a field is tilled, it reads the field is worked. The range of its root is so wide that quite often it results in self-contradiction, just like poetry. So now I have also my praise poem for my ancestry. I created my own tradition. Yeah.
That's wonderful. I'm now going to go to Vladimir. And Vladimir, you might have already guessed what's coming. It's a poem that I think a lot of people will immediately recognize as yours because it's so widespread. But why does it not surprise that even here, even now, there are things that must be left unsaid? That in the linked letters of our cursive fences, we have found ourselves on the outside of ourselves. So Vladimir Lucien, over to you.
Thank you, Yumna, and thank you for having me as part of this wonderful festival. It's good to see literary festivals happening during this time, and it's amazing that the kind of durability we're seeing in the arts and the vigor in the arts at a time when it seems that business and all these other things have shut down. So I think it's a testament to what we do, and that we haven't been wasting our time writing poems and doing these kinds of things. Yeah, that poem is an early poem, but still the sentiment still stands in many ways, and I think in many countries and places as well. And in a way, we're kind of now on the outside of ourselves, inside our houses, and so on. And it's a very interesting poem to think about now, because whenever I take a walk outdoors, I'm in Brooklyn, New York now, so it's at the center of the pandemic, so to speak. But you go outdoors and your breath is covered, you know, you're wearing a mask on your face, so you're kind of indoors when outdoors and kind of outdoors when indoors maybe as well, because you'd like to be outdoors. But yeah, very interesting time. So I always think about the place where I am from, and the unique experience of that place, because and it connects, I think, with what Raphael was talking about, with the praise poetry encounters that could account for years or decades or centuries of ancestry. In the Caribbean, we perpetually exist within a place of a certain liminality insofar as history and ancestry is concerned. I mean, if people are now being plagued by their histories, I think the Caribbean has always been kind of plagued by accusations of being historyless in a sense. Even our canonical writers like V.S. Naipaul and other writers from the Caribbean we've always been battling with this idea of nothingness behind us. And even perhaps in our future as well, this idea that would be our fate. So it's both an advantage and I guess in some ways a disadvantage in some people's minds. But I'm thinking now more than ever, it's perhaps an advantage. And I've thought of it as an advantage because it's a creative imperative. Where there is nothing, there is a creative imperative. And we have both, because we could both say that we do have an ancestry. We have ancestries in Africa and India and so forth, and we also don't. And that means we have a duty to be creative as a people and to mold ourselves as a people according to creativity as part of our birthright. So the poems I've kind of just browsed and thought that I would read. I'll read one short one because I know there'll be more time for reading later. But what it occurs to me now is that in speaking about history and all of that, what has always concerned the Caribbean is more or less the ownership of time in the sense of history, in the way history owns past time. But it's also our struggle has always been one of claiming our spaces. And even now in St. Lucia, the borders have been open for tourists to come in, and already more COVID cases have come in and so forth. And that's an ongoing problem in the Caribbean. So this poem I wrote, it's called Devil's Bridge. And it's about a mythical place, a kind of Caribbean Faust kind of story, sorry. And it's, so it captures something like that, this kind of ambition to have something more than this kind of, destitution that sometimes attends existence there. But anyway, I'll let the poem speak for itself. Now you concoct your own geography to roads that should have shriveled into primitive paths of red dirt, that should have stained your shoes, led you to the squat satisfaction of some zinc-roofed hut. You should have felt the loneliness of all the night's windowsills, the fleeting interest of a small rain, signs and tunnels that disallow your height, because everywhere there is this wilderness of maps that will show you things. Rivers that can fit beneath fingernails, coasts where water is afraid, boundaries too thin to police until a map starts to grow from the seeds in its soil, and trees and places push past their Christian names, and an island discovers its wet, riverine spine. And having crossed your bridge, adventurer, pioneer, you must stumble now upon the scattered heartbeat of potholes, your raised, wayward conscience. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that poem for now. Back to you.
That was so wonderful. I think I'm still in the poem. So I think that was a wonderful poem to begin with. It actually ties in so well to some of what we were thinking about with this panel, which is around where you come from, where you're going. And I know that I have read this to you, but for the sake of our audience, I shall read it again. So the poem is called Snowmen. It's by Agha Shahid Ali. And anyway, I shall leave it to you. And my ancestor, a man of Himalayan snow, came to Kashmir from Samarkand, carrying a bag of whale bones, heirlooms from sea funerals, his skeleton carved from glaciers, his breath arctic. He froze women in his embrace. His wife thawed into stony water, her old age a clear evaporation. This heirloom, his skeleton under my skin, passed from son to grandson, generations of snowmen on my back. They tap every year on my window, their voices hushed to ice. No, they won't let me out of winter, and I've promised myself, even if I'm the last snowman, that I'll ride into spring on their melting shoulders. So it's interesting because when you were talking about the land and how, this way that the rivers can fit under your fingernails and, borders too thin to patrol, these almost, you talk of a world forgotten, a world left behind. You evoke in me, at least in our urban cities, a life that we are so far away from, this world that's almost misty and unseen. So in the context of where we are today in the world, where I personally believe that unlike in our generation, maybe our parents' generation, the whole world is going through the same thing at the same time. Probably the closest thing in time would be the world wars, and even then it probably didn't cover as much of the globe as it currently does. So everyone seems to have their focus on this one thing, and instead of bringing us together, I feel like like some attitudes are hardening, there's more polarization, the fissures are growing, um, and rather than trying to stride into spring as one would hope, while some people are looking to create a juster, a more equal future, there are others that cling with their fingernails onto this past that they're determined to bring back, that this mythical golden age where everything was perfect and everyone knew their place. So I think I would leave that to Raphael, to respond with maybe your next poem or your thoughts.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that, because obviously, since we are all like in this forced isolation, we have time to reflect about where we come from and where we're going. And, sometimes at least I feel scared about what I see coming. Sometimes I feel hopeful. And, I think all we can do for now is to observe and try to, build communities and build networks and make sure that we're doing something positive and building something positive for whatever is going to come next. And so, as a writer, it's an interesting space to be. As a human being, obviously we are being cut off from friends and family and our communities, because we now all live in this like isolated cell. So as a writer, you try to make the best out of it. And what I've seen is, though, and at least, yeah, I can't hear you.
No,
You're
yes.
mute.
I was going to say, do you want to finish your thought? Because I was going to come in on that a little bit. That I kind of feel like, to build on what Vladimir was saying earlier, that in some ways, we're so isolated, we're really separated by these cold screens. And on the other hand, I kind of feel like your hearts, our souls are really reaching out to each other, where, you make more time for the things you care about. You invest more into bonds that, perhaps have frayed with time. And rooting that sort of reaching out soul to soul against this thing about where are you finding purpose, where are you finding meaning, where you talk about finding your creating your own praise song because you feel like the past that you come from didn't have the same resonance that it did for the other people that you're now living within and consider yourself part of. And then similarly for Vladimir, that how a vacuum can be filled and you can choose to fill it, and the power that gives you when you consciously say that this isn't me moorless, this is me choosing to sink the ground that I stand on and to root it in this particular place. So I just wanted to respond on that point that you were making, but now I will. This is really, since it's just the three of us, an open discussion, so feel free. It's not quite that regimented that it's Raphael now and Vladimir now, so feel free to jump in as you like.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So let me read a poem that possibly responds to Vladimir's, because and to what you said as well about the connection to the land. Mm-hmm. So I write blues poems because blues is about nostalgia, but it's a kind of it's a language that also speaks about hope. And so this one is called Friuli blues. Friuli being the land where I was born and raised in Italy. And so this is a nostalgia poem about my land. Friuli blues. Chestnut wood in the dusky fog. Jade waters rest where raisins gray. Before the rain there were shadows across the vines. I wonder how many flowers fell today, how many petals will travel with the clouds. The last moment near tears, light floats the hills of Friuli. Crowds rise to the sky to never return. Their shade specks a road as empty as a dry river, where my youth said goodbye, where I planted a pine tree when I was 6. Or corners of my heart where nows and thens touch borders, and sometimes overlap, making visions ravishing. It is hard to write through this day, move my memories that hit me, like storm waves hit a lighthouse. Immersed in a daze of sensual anarchy, I bathe in the warmth of a blues, hidden in the mist of belonging. So yeah, and Let me read another short one linked to this. It's titled New Questions. Africa is the center of the world. At the center of Africa, a village. At the center of that village, a house. At the center of that house, a man at a table. At the center of that table, the book is reading. At the center of that book, these verses. Anch'io ricordo, ma passò stagione. Quelle bacche agli uccelli della frasca invidiavo, e le purpuree more. E l'ala, i cieli, i boschi, la canzone. At the center of those verses, a comma. At the center of that comma, new questions. So yeah, I'll leave it here with an open-ended poem.
That was lovely. I think that was a fantastic place to leave it. And on that note, I'll pass it over to Vladimir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the poem as well, Raphael.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess still thinking about who do we look to in times like these, and I think that matters a lot, because there seems to be a particular kind of there seems to be reified kind of ideas of everything in the society around us, and it's times like these that give us the opportunity to remove these, or to at least these things anew. Just like the coming down of statues is a metaphor for that. But the question is, I think the testament in whether the lesson of whatever this time is or whether the testament of whether that is learned is our ability to look in the right places. And I can't help but think, I really do think that the Caribbean as a space represents a place that I think, as has been evoked in numerous metaphors by many of our poets, Derek Walcott most famously, is a place that knows how to be broken and whole at the same time, or as Kamau Brathwaite put it, how to be torn and new. And that is kind of the spirit that we need at this time. And I'm thinking of, okay, yes, the Caribbean as a region that represents that, but are various regions around the world able to understand that that is where they ought to be looking, not to the Caribbean, but to whatever bears this metaphor within their own societies, which is exactly who they probably would not look to before. It's the person who was somehow consigned to some status of the subaltern, really. That is actually where, in one form or another, without fetishizing them, without exoticizing, but understanding, they may have the systems to deal with a time like this because they've been living it in one way or another in those societies. So I can't help but think about that. In St. Lucia now, I'm getting the news from back home all the time. And the Caribbean hasn't been badly hit, but the Caribbean is a place where if it hits, it will hit terribly. And St. Lucia actually is among one of the few islands to open their borders very kind of readily and hastily to tourists, because tourism is the mainstay of the economy there. So it raises interesting questions, and it has already raised interesting contradictions about how we feel about our populations and how we value perhaps what is stranger or what is outside of where we're from. I'll read a poem. It's the last poem in my book. It's called Ebb 2. There's actually a poem I wrote when going back home to St. Lucia after studying in Trinidad, which is a country in the Caribbean too, but the economy is not based on tourism, and they don't have these kinds of humiliations that attend the reality as much. But so I'll just read this poem as part of it. It's also part of what I've been saying about space claiming and kind of starting to analyze how this, how are we able to occupy the spaces that we're in. Black Americans have lived in America for so long, and they haven't been able to properly occupy that space. They in fact have to face constant reminders in these statues and these things of how much they don't belong to that space. And these are the very statues and so on that are being pulled down right now. So Ebb 2. I feel it when I am in the open lung of my hammock, reading on the veranda of my East Coast apartment. I feel it when I am driving down the causeway to Pigeon Island with the sunroof pulled back, letting the wind rough up my clothes. Then I come to lie down on the beach, to sit with legs crossed like a vendor's tray, to settle and see the ocean and the true brochure bright colors of my island. The man selling fruits on the sea, the fishing boats at Groselay, the big naval teen-eggs running and diving off the jetty with arms like huge tamarinds. While I am there, a tourist smiles and nothing smile. A hotel worker fakes an accent on the beach with flowers in his shirt whose roots are killing his heart. Another man is offering horse rides and bright beach umbrellas. The pillars at the Sandals Hotel separate the locals from the tourists. I feel it when I take my toes out of this sand, when I am leaving this place, when I am driving on the causeway which feels from inside my car as if it is made of breeze. I feel it when I pass by my hammock and enter the small aromatic alphabet of the rooms in my apartment. I feel it in the cool dusk coming, in the small ultimatums of light switches. I feel it in the sound of the Atlantic entering the house alone, in the colorful silence of its precious stones.
It's that's the power of poetry, that it really brings it home to you. I once described it as, and it's the opposite side of that. I once described it as the difference between my skin and the culture, the gap that exists. Like they say on the London Metro, mind the gap. And I was saying it in the context of the fact that everywhere I've traveled that's been colonized by Europe has felt a little bit like home. And when I traveled to the neighboring country, which was, East Asia, so you travel to South Korea, you travel to Japan, to China, and the distance between my skin and the culture is so large, basically because all of Africa and so much of Asia and South America and North America, we're all influenced by this European way of looking at the world, that we carry it with us. And I'm making this point in response to your poem two ways. One is that there is this perspective of place that, you adapt when a culture becomes a part of yours, and that's what happens between colonizers and the colonized, that you take in bits of it, but then there is this hierarchy upon where you're looking, whether you're looking up or whether you're looking down. And the Edward Colton statue coming down in the UK and trying to reclaim these spaces that you talk about, Vladimir, where you're trying to center the subaltern, it to occupy the space rather than to remain on the fringes, is a conversation that is so important. And to also begin to consciously make those choices to step away from the perspective that has been given to you by the educational system, by the perspective that you've taught are right, the histories that are in your books, and to say that isn't the only story. So I wanted to respond by saying the taking back of spaces that are yours when you have to rely on others, whether for the right to draw water from a well, whether the right to worship, whether the right to, it's a reality we know well in India. We think that that we carry with us this whole feeling of coming out of colonization, but the hierarchies that exist in society don't go away, and they need to be brought into the center and be discussed and be acknowledged and be responded to. And Raphael, I want to talk a little bit with you about this a country that has been through apartheid, that has viewed color as a sign of privilege, that makes assumption when people see you. How do you respond to that? Because I know that must be feeding into the work that you create. You're muted, Raphael.
Yeah, obviously South Africa has that kind of legacy, which is a very heavy legacy, and it's a past that has not been erased, fully. Since as you all know, South Africa is one of the most polarized countries in the world in terms of rich and poor. You have like this obnoxious wealth, displayed side to side with extreme poverty. And so all these things are really in your face day by day. And when I was still in Italy, and in '94, when South Africa became a democracy, I was just too young to understand what was happening, and I was just starting to get interested into this country, and we had this myth of the rainbow nation that was hovering over the Western world, of this country that had come out of apartheid and now was flourishing under this rainbow. So when I first came here, I had this expectation of a country that was building something great. But to be honest, I mean, it didn't take long to realize what was really happening here, and how the disparities are still striking. And it's a racialized country. It's a polarized country in terms of economy. And I think that the situation we are living in now are going to make things even worse, because the poor are getting poorer and the very few rich are getting richer. So it's every country's got its own challenges, but South Africa, I mean, it's a country of extremes, which somehow for a writer it's a kind of blessing, if you want to say so. But to live here, it's another story. So I didn't plan to read this poem, but since we're touching on this, there is a poem that actually is one of those watershed poem in my career as a writer. And I wrote it in 2012 when, I don't know if you remember, when the South African police gunned down some 40 miners that were striking in the site of Marikana. So that was, for me, I was already critical of the government, of the situation here, but that moment really changed everything, not just for me, but for writers, definitely, and from a large part of the population. So that's when really, this so-called neo-apartheid, or this neo-colonial, structure that is still here, show its most cruel and bloodiest side. So I wrote this poem after that massacre, and it was the first poem published after the massacre of Marikana, and it kind of pushed other writers to write about it. And I also compiled an anthology, a collection of essays and poems and short stories on this topic. So yeah, it's actually the only document based on creative writing that exists on the Marikana massacre. There have been essays have been written by scholars, but this is the one that I edited. Is titled Marikana: A Moment in Time. Is the only work that speaks about that massacre by the South African police. It's been written by poets. So my poem is titled Walking to School, and it was inspired by this picture where the day after the massacre, some of the bodies of the miners were still lying on the side of the road, and the children were going to school, and they were just passing by the corpses of their father, probably. And so some journalists captured that image and published in the newspaper. So I wrote the poem after that, and it's called Walking to School. In Marikana, I have seen black children staring at their fathers' lifeless bodies on their way to school. Stale blood clots under their perfectly polished shoes. At school, all the teachers were in their place. Kosato did not call no general strike. What for? The English teacher was crying. The math teacher was drunk as usual. The history teacher spoke about the beauty of the new constitution. The geography teacher spoke about the richness of South African soil. In the NIMEX, the platinum futures shot up to unprecedented levels. Still, most kids at lunch break had no food in their scaftins. With empty stomachs, they all sang Così si che Africa. then went back home. Their father corpses were still there, just a little colder. So, yeah, that was my own, sense of way of making sense of being in a country where, things like this still happen. That was the most spectacular, so to speak, event in terms of, police brutality. But it wasn't definitely the first one. It wasn't the last one. And these things still continue to happen, And then we know what happened also around the world, what has been happening recently in America, and what, how people have responded to that. So, as I said, as I kind of introduced this topic before, my relationship with South Africa has always been a kind of love-hate relationship, extreme love, but also, a feeling of, being conscious of being in a country where you really have to, ask your role, which one is your role every day, in a place like this. So I think that poem captured that feeling, in a deep way for me, at least. I don't know if it's the same for the readers and the listeners, but it definitely is for me.
I think it really brings you into that moment and the horror of it all, so it regardless of how far away you go from that moment in time, it brings it all back into this viscerality. So it is, I think, a reality of the world that we live in, that we're all, now we're in physical bubbles, but I think usually we're in our little, we're in a different sort of bubble, that we travel around the world, wrapped in bubble wrap, based on our class, based on our work. Yeah. And we don't really inhabit the same social, emotional cultures. I mean, all of this is so obvious, but it drives it home so much when you're locked down. So one of the reasons we started this festival, and it's in support of creative people, but it was to watch that the last time we had this huge plague, nearly half the victims globally were Indian. And it was against that awareness that as Vladimir said, if it strikes in India, we really don't have the ability to provide treatment for everybody. So the government locked down really harshly as a protective measure. But the number of people who depended upon, daily wages to survive is 140 million, right? So
very same situation in South Africa. I mean, not everyone can have the opportunity to get, medical treatment. But the same people that had to be locked down are the people who live, on a day-by-day basis. So it's very same situation.
So it was really that, you are you become inured to them. It's your mind's eye that looks away, so you don't constantly keep focusing, and you force yourself as writers to see, to acknowledge the injustice, the way the world should be different. You try and be the change, as Gandhi would say. You try and make a difference. You try and give a voice, and to be sort of shut in, with no ability to go out, but to watch this happening through your television screens, and that viscerality, the baby crying next to the dead mother. I mean, it's there. What are you going to do? Who's going to take that child in? So I think that horror, that was a really powerful poem to me. Raphael, thank you for sharing.
Thank you. I was
Vladimir, on that note,
really inspired by
we turn to you.
I in all of this, and especially in facing a time like this, which seems and is conveyed, in the media in many ways, justifiably so to some extent, of course, as a great interruption at the very least, and also a tragedy in that sense. I was thinking of the piece that I planned to read, which, as I told you, was drawn from a letter that I had been asked to write kind of to the world, which I thought was a wonderful initiative during this time. But I was thinking of the way in which the poem, it's kind of a prose poem of sorts or something of that nature. It surrounds a particular dance that we do in the Caribbean. And even as you're talking about being in social bubbles and so on, in fact, this is very important to what you're saying, because one of the centers of Caribbean culture is an extremely public yet an extremely public event, which is Carnival. Carnival is central not just to as a cultural activity, but as an articulation of an epistemology, an articulation of an ontology, an articulation of a way of being, where you're both public and you're also your deepest, truest self in a way, or even beyond your normal self on that day, because a certain kind of liberation attends it, even when it's also concerned with masking. So I'm thinking Carnival is the most interesting and most complex metaphor for a time like this, including its association with masks and the necessity of masking, in a different sense, of course, because in the Caribbean we call participating in Carnival playing mass or playing a mask, really and truly, and it's about self-creation, and it's about enduring in the face of numerous things. It's about defining yourself amongst the crowd while being part of the crowd. It's about balance. It's about all of these things. So, I mean, I can say, there's so much more I could say about Carnival as a metaphor for this. But what I also think is Carnival happens every year, and people, whether they're poor or rich, find the money because it's becoming increasingly expensive to participate in it. And it might seem counterintuitive, but it isn't, because there's something extremely important happening, and it's a ritual. And as a ritual, what it's speaking to is the idea of process as a metaphor for the life that we're living. And I don't know, are we willing to interpolate or to see the pandemic within the context of an idea of process, life as process? Because we view life as something we establish in a particular way, and then there are interruptions, rather than something that's constantly kind of going through a process. And then even though we reach the point of saying, yes, we understand the process, do we reach the point of understanding what our role is to be able to deal with this particular part of the process, or what it's kind of indicating to us? So the dance I'm talking about, which I'll describe in the piece, is it's a very interesting dance because it's not elegant at all. I'll just read the piece. The dance is called chipping. And the suggestion in the name is very much like what anybody would know as chipping, very small, mincing steps. Okay, so I'll read an excerpt from it, really. What if I told you that I could teach you a dance that you could dance forever? It is a simple dance. In it, the body seems almost dead, but yet it isn't. In it, the body almost seems to be tottering, dragging itself onward, somewhere on the edge of life, wherever it is that is, for it could be anywhere. And this dance could be done anywhere, in fact. It is difficult to discern it from walking. It is slow, it is languid, it is leisurely, but it is in its slow, languid, leisurely way insistent, urgent, and determined. It is life unfinished, and life as always unfinished, and thus ongoing, eternal. The steps are short, almost imperceptible, and even direction is uncertain. But the steps, those short steps are there, are certain in themselves, in their small and simple knowledge that the direction is in them, in the steps themselves, in their rhythm's demand for loyalty and devotion, the blind devotion of feet who never know where our minds, the errands of our lives, the errands of our souls are taking them. This dance we call chipping. It is the dance that is danced on the road for Carnival in the Caribbean. One of the dances, but it is the dance that outlasts all others. For it is the dance of the beginning and the dance that resists the end. The dance that wants to dance forever, to begin forever. Undistinguished, unadorned, it is bare. It is walking, but walking does not beg, does not ask. Walking bears the calm and arrogance of the sentence. Walking assumes its completion. Walking forgets the earth. This dance, chipping, is an entreaty, a question we ask both of the earth and of ourselves. Can we keep going? Can we do this forever? And the earth, hardened to us, gives a slow answer accumulating in our steps. The earth allows us to answer ourselves. The earth shares the answer between itself and our feet, and that secret and sacred point where they meet, bound by the pact of rhythm, by their shared inheritance of gravity, by their shared stake in the sound of footsteps. What we ask in light, the earth answers in shadow. What the earth asks in shadow, we answer in light. Can we dance through this time? We ask the earth. We ask ourselves. Can we devise a dance so slight, so patient, so utterly invested in each inelegant step? Can we chip at this time, at this world? Can we ask questions while we keep moving? Can we slow down? Can we devise a pace at which we can dance forever? Can we chip? Can we chip away at the new world being carved by our chipping? Can we dance this life? Can we bring this dance to life? Can we dance this dance which is like walking, which is like questioning, which is like carrying on, which is its own tired and untiring certainty of life, of death, of hope, of the tomorrow growing secretly underneath our feet?
That was wonderful. That was really wonderful. And it actually, I was completely in the rhythm of it. I loved it. You know, this process that I think is central to how we deal with this, because this situation is not going away. It is not going to vanish one day, disappear. You know, it's not going to melt away in the summer. It is here, and that level of acceptance to say this is our reality. And how do you then take that moment out, you know, that you say so beautifully in your poem to find meaning, but at the same time allow the rhythm to carry you through. It was a beautiful poem, Vladimir. Thank you so much. For me, the centrality also of the earth responding spoke to me, as did it also harkened me back to when Raphael's imagery of, you know, looking back at his hometown and what must be happening there, you know, when things are left alone and how they have the leaves fallen, also brings me to talk about this entire process that we're a part of has caused us to withdraw from the earth, a thing that we would have never thought possible before, and how the earth has responded. You know, the blue skies have been seen above cities like they haven't been in years, you know, not to mention the wildlife that is now emerging. And it also poses the question in a very real way of the fact that the relationship can be reversed and made whole so easily if we step lightly and if we step in rhythm, than rather if we rampage with no concern but ourselves. So I wanted to make that connection also with the moment that we find ourselves in, the process that we're forced to inhabit of stepping lightly upon a place that is bequeathed to us, and that we have to bequeath not just to 1 or 2 or 3 generations to come, but for the future. So that is my response to your poem. I now put it back onto you to say, Raphael, would you like to come in? Or Vladimir? We have about 12 minutes. I don't know, we'll keep an eye out for Michelle, see if she joins us. But I think we'll take the hour for ourselves.
I think just one other thing I wanted to say, and I it's somewhat in the poem and outside of it in many ways, and it's connected to what I was saying earlier. What we see. I had this experience in England once, in London, walking about London one day, going from monument to monument, and I felt tired. I felt like I was carrying all of that stone with me after a while, I don't know, somewhere inside of me. And it weighed down on me. And it was very different because in the Caribbean, we don't have that. We don't have it. We don't have all of these monuments. Either we're not invested in it. It's not something that we value in that way. And I remember Derek Walcott once saying, the mountains are my monuments. And it's a very different kind of way of being from what I encountered in England, and I kept thinking also, you know, when I was looking at how intricate the architecture and so on, and the cathedrals were, like, somebody took the time to build that or to do all of this and so forth. It was just like, who was doing it, you know, and so on. And as we're seeing statues coming down, as we're seeing this world that has raised so many monuments to whoever they like to, whatever their character, coming down. When I spoke earlier about the kind of reification of particular relationships of power, it's also the modality of reification that needs to come down. It's also that thing that tries to make things concrete and immovable and so on that needs to come down. So the modality I'm talking about that replaces this is also the modality, I think, that is represented in the places of the society where persons have been relegated to an inferior position. And so what it ushers in is not one group of people taking over the helm of anything. It's actually a new way of being that these people are coming to initiate into the society. And it's a way of being that is not exclusive. Exclusivity and reification go hand in hand, because it's the idea that you are this and you are nothing else. I am powerful. I am of this class. I am of this thing. When that is only that's only a provisional reality. All of these things are only provisional. So that is, I just wanted to clarify that and kind of also connect it with what the poem may have evoked regarding it as well. And I think it's important to remember at this time. The mountains being our monuments is an interesting kind of way to start to think. And I remember a line from a Trinidadian poet, Indo-Trinidadian poet, Vani Capildeo, where she says in a poem, which is probably not about anything like this, but she says, "The weather wants to be alone." And when I go outside now, it's summer in New York. The trees now are, all the leaves are out, but you can't really breathe the air as you'd like to. So the earth it's right in front of you, but it's saying, no, not yet, not just yet. I want to be alone. I want to be alone for now. So it's an interesting and humbling kind of reality to be living through, and we ought to learn the lessons that I guess that come with it.
Thank you. I loved your response that is coming. The other thing that I was thinking about is when you talk about the subaltern, because there is a fragility, because there is no support system, the reification that holds the top of society up also enables them to be alone, to be independent, to not depend, to not dance in step. Whereas when you talk about the carnival, when you talk about this interwoven societal dependence on each other, that you all move together, you create a rhythm, and that rhythm keeps you dancing, is another thing that I hope surfaces at a time like this, that you realize that the not just our interplay with the environment and the skies and the mountains and the trees, and then all of the little urban wildlife that comes to visit, but also this societal dependence where we learn from the subaltern how much richer our life can be, when we interplay with each other on a more equal basis. We have about 7.5 minutes left. I'd like to leave it all to your poems. They are so brilliant, and I think we've had a very rich discussion. Perhaps if you could share a few more work, and then we'll close. So Raphael, to you. I will unmute you, or you will unmute yourself.
Yes. So thank you very much, Yumna. Thank you very much, Vladimir. Through this discussion and through the listening of the poems that you guys read, you completely messed up the plan that I had about poems that I had chosen for tonight. So I will close with one poem that Derek Walcott has been mentioned a couple of times. So I will tell you a story about this poem and how it is linked to Derek Walcott, and then I will close with a lighter poem. So the first poem, I wrote it in 2018 when I was invited to a conference in Italy, in Naples. There was a conference that focused on the crisis on the Mediterranean, where African people are trying to cross the Mediterranean and dying in the process, in millions. So they invited me to that conference to do a reading, and they told me that I was going to share the panel with Zineb Sedira. Zineb Sedira is an Algerian visual artist whose work I love. And so when they told me that I was going to share the panel with her, I was very excited. And so I decided to take one of her works and write a poem after it. So the work that I chose is called Middle Sea. And so I wrote this poem called Middle Sea Blues. So I read the poem for her, and then a couple of weeks later, I was still in Italy in another conference, and that's where I was sharing the panel with Indian poet Jaydeep Sarangi. I don't know if you guys know him. So I was sharing the panel, I met Jaydeep, and we shared the panel, we read poems. At the end of the panel, he told me, look, I'm guest editing an Indian journal, the issue of an Indian journal called Muse India, dedicated to Derek Walker. Do you have a poem for me? And I'm like, I might have a poem for you. And I submitted Middle Sea Blues, and it was published. So when that happened, it made me think about the story of this poem, which is a poem inspired by an Algerian artist living in France, written in English by an Italian living in South Africa, and published in an Indian journal dedicated to a Caribbean writer. So it really made me realize how poetry can transcend boundaries very easily, you know, when it comes from a place of authenticity, I guess. So I will read Middle Sea Blues first, inspired by Middle Sea by Zineb Sadira. Ghost-like, we sneak into the underground corridors of your safe existence, eager to catch bits of sun with our broken fishnets. Lighthouses illuminate the transparent walls of our life stories, as the wind steals our memories and abandons them on the waterfronts that left us, the day we left them. The seagulls and the waves on whose wings we travel vanish behind clouds in the twilight breeze like drumbeats do. We've been crossing seas, deserts, and borders like our ancestors did, like our children will do. We keep on moving towards the unknown. Middle seas have been swallowing us, and in their belly we have learned how to sing the blues. We are still here today to sing it back to you. And when it is too hard to sing it, we hide it inside a smile. So that's the journey poem. And then I will close with a poem on a lighter note. It's a cut-up poem, written, made with the last words that famous artists said on their deathbed just before they died. So I took all these things that artists said before they died, did a cut-up, and this was the result. Last words cut up. Am I dying, or is this my birthday? Anyhow, what was the question? Legs that want to sleep cured by too many doctors. The fog is rising, prepared as worn costumes. Protect me from the rats. Now that I'm ready above the earth, I'd be food for wild dogs and hawks. If I had the strength to hold the pen, if I could still hear voices that are not from this earth, I would write a poem on how easy and relaxed life can be. Why not? More light, more time. Sleeping has always bored me. I leave you with your worries and problems, and here my task ends. I'm sorry I'm quiet, but last words are good only for those who did not say enough while they were still alive. Now, my good man, this is not time for making enemies. However, you must tell me the truth. What do I do with all these years? Did that queen really love me? How do peasants survive? I have revealed half of what I've seen. The comedy is over. Clap your hands. How beautiful you all look under the sun. I want the sea to welcome me now. I am ready for the one big question. Take bishops off me, but sing Pressure Lord, Take My Hand every night, and make sure you sing it good. LSD, 100 milligrams, please. No comment. Thank you.
Okay, I'll just quickly chime in. Thank you, Raphael.
Thank you.
I'll do two brief poems, one with a human and one with an animal. I think the animal will have the last word. This poem is called Rain Fights, and I think it's just kind of strangely connected to what we've been talking about. Applies in a totally different way than what I was thinking when I wrote it, but I guess that's how poems work. May we always argue and suffer the intervention of rain and thunder that sends us lightning into each other. We are overflowing with things to say, but we bring up bygones, raise to scrutiny patterns of action, of painful consequence. May we say nothing and listen to the greater argument of rain, to the possibility of lost roofs and landslides outside. It will subside, and like the mud, we will survive it all. The tired sky will shine again, the gutters will dry up, and we will turn over ourselves, each holding our private puddle of pain. And the last poem is called Kobo. Kobo is the name we use in some Caribbean countries for a vulture-like bird that feeds on carrion. Kobo rises and flaps our world downward because the earth comes to terms with itself first through its birds, looming above the identities of days, rubbing shoulders with rain. Kobo rises and lures our earth to us like bait because it is ours, and in his wisdom, quietly, he waits, he waits, he waits politely until we have finished ourselves. Kobo rises, removes himself from the world or the world from himself, maneuvering through the low, difficult blue until he is all sky. He rises dimly, darkly, with his neck of mail. Shard of night diving swiftly, pray, 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 he says. His business is what remains. Thank you.
That was so beautiful. Both of the poems, you could almost forget they were about death. Thank you both. It's been absolutely stunning. I have loved, being in conversation with you. Thank you for joining the festival. It has had, it started from a little dream of being locked up and just watching the world through a laptop screen, and finding solace in beauty and poetry and challenge. And so thank you. You have manifested my dream in a new way, and I have loved the light that you have shed. Thank you so very much for joining us today.